In the World Cup 2014, Argentina lost to Germany and obtained the runner-up position, once again staging a scene of "Don't Cry for Me, Argentina."
Don't cry for me, Argentina. The truth is I never left you all through my wild days.
Why do I say once again? Because Argentina has been crying for nearly 100 years. Argentina, as a very peculiar country, has attracted widespread attention from economists and political scientists. It is the country that has experienced the most severe economic decline in the ranking of the 20th century. Before World War I, Argentina's per capita GDP once ranked among the top 5 in the world, surpassing Canada, France, and Australia. After 1930, Argentina experienced 7 coups, political turmoil, economic decline, fiscal collapse, and malignant inflation. These demons have taken turns on the stage, and the situation has continued until now. Recently, Argentina just defaulted on its national debt, and its president not only showed no remorse, but also angrily rebuked the creditors for greed. Currently, Argentina's per capita GDP has dropped to 65th place and continues to show a downward trend. Moreover, Argentina's fiscal health, international competitiveness, and economic vitality are all in a terrible state. The entire country's future is worrying, and it is expected to continue crying in the future. Argentina is a country where 98% of the population is white. The literacy rate reaches 100%, with 42.3% of the population being able to speak English. The people have a very high level of education. Argentina has produced 5 Nobel Prize laureates, including 3 in the field of natural sciences and 2 in peace, an achievement that cannot be reached without a solid foundation in primary and higher education. Additionally, Argentina possesses excellent natural resources. What's even more remarkable is that Argentina has a well-developed transportation system. As early as the mid-19th century, alongside the Industrial Revolution, Argentina began constructing a railway network. At its peak, Argentina had 47,000 kilometers of railways, making it one of the countries with the densest railway networks in the world. Furthermore, its capital, Buenos Aires, has always been a prime port. Foreign trade has been the cornerstone of Argentina's foundation. Both domestically and internationally, transportation is not a weak point for Argentina. In the 20th century, economists often attribute a country's failure to low natural resources, insufficient education and infrastructure, thereby providing excuses for governments to take more power. They believe that building schools and roads can solve the problem of slow national development. However, Argentina possesses abundant natural resources, exemplary education and transportation systems, and a population with high qualifications. It is to the extent that economists joke there are 3 types of countries in the world: developed countries, developing countries, and Argentina. Success is the accumulation of multiple factors, while failure can occur with just one factor going wrong. Modernization has been a rare occurrence outside of Europe and America. It is not surprising that the majority of developing countries continue to struggle with poverty and instability. The success of a country is rooted in a combination of factors. We understand that the modernization of the United States and the United Kingdom is deeply rooted in the Anglo-Saxon tradition of freedom and common law. To understand the essence of the United States, we must examine its history from a developmental perspective. As former colonies, the North American territories adopted the British common law system. The 13 colonies were not established simultaneously but rather independently, practicing self-governance and enacting laws similar to constitutions. The British Empire itself did not have an absolute monarchy, so it could not exercise absolute control over the entire continent as Spain did. As early as the 17th century, the Puritans established New England with the aim of escaping persecution. They placed great importance on rural autonomy and community development, building churches and schools at the center of each village or town. This tradition was enshrined in land measurement and ownership laws in the 1780s. The Acts of 1785 and 1787 emphasized the significance of religion and public education for a democratic system. In contrast, the Southern tradition in Virginia emphasized that once land was allocated by the federal and state governments to towns, those towns had the right to dispose of the land freely, encouraging individual ownership of unclaimed land. The land laws in the United States encompass the characteristics of both the North and the South, safeguarding property rights, while promoting grassroots democracy and autonomy. The Land Act of 1804 reduced the minimum land purchase requirement from 640 acres to 320 acres, encouraging individuals and families to acquire land rather than plantation owners and speculators. The Land Act of 1862, aimed at attracting immigrants, further emphasized equal opportunities. Any household head, over the age of 21, who built a house on 160 acres of land and cultivated it for 5 years, could become the owner of that land by paying a fee of $18. Under the comprehensive and relatively equal land system in the United States, a large number of Northwest European farmers immigrated to America. These farmers, predominantly Protestant and equipped with advanced agricultural techniques, embarked on the famous westward expansion. With the lure of the land laws and protection provided by the Second Amendment to the Constitution, the Pan-Germanic armed pioneers spread the seeds of freedom and autonomy from Massachusetts and Virginia to the Pacific coast. The United States gradually expanded westward from the eastern coastline, and in this process, the new immigrants maintained continuity within the system. The economic equality brought about political equality, effectively avoiding the pitfalls of class struggle in a democratic society. From its inception, the United States has been a property-owning democracy. It became a world of landlords, where everyone owned land and had the right to bear arms. Communities and towns managed their own schools and churches, fostering a grassroots political ecosystem that shaped the self-perception and ideology of the American people. Collective consciousness, a sense of self-confidence, self-reliance, and self-improvement. The notion of land redistribution from the rich to the poor hardly exists because everyone is a landowner. The abundance of the New World, combined with the Anglo-Saxon common law, created the United States, a country born free and growing freely. In comparison, the liberators of South America admired the founding fathers of the United States, and in fact, the independence movement in South America itself was inspired and motivated by the American independence. They yearned for another United States of America in Latin America. The elites of Argentina did not neglect the construction of institutions. On the contrary, it carefully designed the constitution and electoral systems, with democracy always being their sacred ideal. However, excellent institutions cannot be simply designed. At that time, South America had been enveloped in the absolute monarchy and divine rule of Spain for nearly 300 years. Land and mineral resources had been monopolized and divided among the royal families, nobility, and wealthy merchants. The new immigrants, who were workers in the old continent, remained workers in the new continent. The micro-mechanisms of American democracy were not implemented in South America. In Argentina, for example, landowners possessed vast tracts of land that they themselves couldn't cultivate. They had to hire agricultural workers, who did not have a deep love for the land. If possible, these workers would certainly move to Buenos Aires. Their children would go abroad for education, rather than attending rural church schools. Argentina was a world lacking in landowners. Argentina today remains a traditional powerhouse in football, and Argentine football was introduced by British immigrants from the birthplace of football. That's right, British immigrants. When it comes to British-Argentine relations, the friendship between Britain and Argentina has a long and deep-rooted history. The Argentine War of Independence was supported by the British Empire. Not only was the British Empire the first to recognize Argentine independence and establish diplomatic relations with it, but it also pressured Spain to recognize Argentine independence. Of course, the purpose of doing so was to expand the British Empire's overseas trade and break the Spanish absolute monarchy's monopoly on trade with Argentina. In the early 19th century, British merchants had already settled in Argentina, and after Argentina gained independence, the two countries signed a trade agreement, integrating Argentina into the world system dominated by the British Empire, which was flourishing at the time. With the deepening of trade relations between the two countries, more and more British capital entered Argentina. In 1851, the first World Expo was held at the Crystal Palace in London, marking the beginning of an era on a global scale. In 1855, Argentina built its first railway, and most of the subsequent railway development was led by British capital. The fertile pampas grasslands, dormant for thousands of years, were awakened by the arteries of iron and fire, and grain and meat warehouses gradually took shape. With the development of long-distance shipping and refrigeration technology, Argentina's beef could be supplied to dinner tables throughout Europe. At the same time, European immigrants continued to pour into Argentina. All factors of production were allocated through investment, immigration, and trade. The collision of labor, capital, and resources, like hydrogen meeting oxygen, resulted in explosive growth that propelled Argentina into a golden age. If we go back to 1910, as a young Sicilian in the port of Palermo, you would have a dilemma in deciding whether to go to New York or Buenos Aires, and you might even have to rely on flipping a coin to decide. Meanwhile, the British brought the Harrods department store to Buenos Aires, the only one outside London. This illustrates the prosperity and affluence of the former Little Paris of South America. Throughout the 19th century, British immigrants arrived in Argentina one after another. Among them were large landowners who made fortunes from livestock and wheat, railway engineers, bankers, missionaries, and even some families who sent their second sons directly to Argentina to seek their fortune, due to the inheritance system favoring the eldest son. How close were British-Argentine relations? At that time, Argentina was referred to as an extraterritorial British Empire. 10% of British overseas investment flowed into Argentina, while 39% of foreign investment in Argentina came from Britain. Unfortunately, the British only brought football and the Harrods department store, railways, and the lifestyle of the upper class. They did not bring common law and state rights. Only when the tide recedes do we discover who is swimming naked. Just like a person in adolescence, Argentina finds it challenging to overcome genetic deficiencies through nutrition alone. In 1914, after the distant gunshot in Sarajevo, the first golden age of globalization and free trade came to an end. The British Empire and the global system it led came to a natural end. Although 4 years later, Britain appeared as a victor, it could only maintain a facade. On the other side of the Atlantic, the feast continued, but a constitutional crisis was inevitable. Argentina was a sovereign nation, but the special position of Britain and its interests in its constitution had been established during its war for independence. Any Argentine politician could not ignore the interests of the British Empire and their governance, just as they could not ignore public opinion. The collapse of the British Empire meant that the primary force to maintain the existing order disappeared. If Argentina experienced turmoil, Britain would no longer have the capability to cross the sea and intervene in the name of safeguarding its own interests. The sense of ownership in the lives of the American people, combined with the historical imagination of the victorious Independence War and the messianic complex of Christianity, completed the coming of age of their community. This pride and piety kept Americans consistently conservative, firmly believing in the righteousness of their own path and the sanctity of tradition. The American Constitution could sustain itself without relying on Great Britain and the global system. In fact, it would become the creator of the future global system. Argentina was not so fortunate. The lingering legacy of absolute monarchy planted hidden dangers for the future community. Argentina did not have a tradition of federal governance, nor was it born free as the United States. The people, lacking wealthy landowners, also lacked political virtue and respect of property. The absence of constraints from Great Britain meant that the ideals of South American liberators, democratic systems, would become untamed wild horses turning into chaos. The collapse of the empire began with the extraterritorial empire. In 1929, the economic crisis erupted, causing a large number of Argentine agricultural workers to lose their jobs and migrate to Buenos Aires. Additionally, some Italian immigrants who came to Argentina in the 1920s brought with them fascism. In 1930, a military coup occurred in Argentina, forcing the last pro-British president to step down. When the coup troops entered Buenos Aires, the citizens even welcomed them. The meticulously designed constitution of Argentina's founding heroes turned into waste paper. To this day, the core of political struggle in the United States has always been the battle for the interpretation of the Constitution, which itself is a sign of a healthy community and a victory for the rule of law. The welcoming of coup troops by the citizens of Buenos Aires was a demonstration of the lack of political virtue and a complete failure in building a community. With the absence of the rule of law, naked violence became the supreme authority, reshaping the long-term expectations of everyone and dooming the future of the entire country. The democratic system without the rule of law turned into a political oligarchy that sought rent and power. Meanwhile, intermittent military dictatorships further divided the national consensus, making the return to normal constitutional governance increasingly impossible. In the 1940s, the Argentine government nationalized a large number of British companies, including the predominantly British-owned railways. They also increased trade barriers and implemented an import substitution policy. Import substitution refers to a country adopting various measures to restrict the import of certain foreign industrial goods, promote domestic production of related industrial goods, gradually replace imported goods with domestic products in the domestic market, create favorable conditions for national industrial development with the aim of achieving industrialization. These policies isolated Argentina from the international trade system. As a result, the Argentine economy plummeted, and it entered the vicious cycle. These policies were essentially aiming to rebuild the constitutional framework and completely dismantle any remnants of the British Empire. Most people in Argentina were not property owners, which distinguished Argentina from the United States. The collective consciousness of the working class became a victim mentality, and the premature implementation of a democratic system amplified the power of this mentality. Victim mentality distorts values and blames others for the excuse of its own failure. The British Empire, which was originally one of the founding shareholders of Argentina, served as a pillar of the Golden Era's constitutional system and an economic driving force. However, after Perón and his beloved wife, the Argentine government portrayed Britain as an aggressor and the source of all problems in Argentina. Whether it was democratically elected civilian governments or military dictatorships, Britain was the scapegoat. Capitalism and free trade, represented by Britain, also became the source of greed. Argentina preferred its own grass to Britain's seedlings. The concept of a free constitutional system eventually transformed into a revolutionary constitutional system. Argentina's revolutionary diplomacy finally reached its climax in 1982, when the Falklands War broke out between Argentina and Britain. As Margaret Thatcher said, "I can't bear Britain in decline, I just can't." The British Empire struck back and emerged victorious. From then on, Argentina has been weeping without much self-introspection, while history continues to unfold.